I never thought the worst week of my life could get even worse. Losing my son had already shattered something inside me that I knew would never fully heal. But I didn't realize that grief was only the beginning, that what came next would strip away everything else I had left. It had been 6 days since Daniel passed. 6 days of silence that felt louder than any scream. 6 days of walking through the house like a ghost, touching his things, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne that still lingered on his jackets. I kept folding and refolding his clothes, as if that simple act could somehow bring order to the chaos in my heart. That morning, I was sitting in the living room, holding one of his sweaters in my hands. It was soft, worn at the cuffs, his favorite. I pressed it to my face and closed my eyes. That's when Olivia walked in. "My dear Isabella," she said, her voice sharp in a way I had never heard before. "We need to talk." I looked up, surprised. Just yesterday, in front of everyone at the funeral, she had been gentle, composed, almost caring. But now, something in her tone had changed. "Of course," I said quietly. "What is it?" She didn't sit down. She stayed standing in the doorway, arms crossed, like she was already finished with the conversation before it began. "I've been thinking about the situation," she said. "About the house." A cold feeling settled deep in my chest. "With Daniel gone, things have to change," she continued. "The kids and I need space. Time to move on." And honestly, she hesitated for a second, then said it plainly, "Having you here makes that impossible." I blinked, unsure if I had heard her correctly. "I don't understand," I whispered. "You're always crying, always going through his things, talking about him like he's still here." Her voice was calm, almost clinical. "It's not healthy for the children." My hands tightened around the sweater. "This is my home too," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Daniel wanted me here. We talked about it. He asked me to help with the kids." Olivia let out a small laugh, cold, dismissive. "Daniel said a lot of things when he was sick," she replied. "But the reality is, this house is mine now, and I need you to leave." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Leave," I repeated. "Yes," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Pack your things. You're a grown woman, Isabella. You'll figure something out." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Everything in my life, my son, my grandchildren, this home, had been taken from me in less than a week. "What about Emma and Lucas?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I take care of them. I help with school, meals." "I'll manage," she cut in. "It's time they learn independence anyway." Her indifference hurt more than anything. Those children had run into my arms when they were scared. They had fallen asleep listening to my stories. I had been there for every scraped knee, every nightmare. And now, I was nothing. "How long do I have?" I asked. "Tomorrow evening," she said. "I have people coming to redesign Daniel's office. I don't want any complications. Tomorrow. 24 hours to erase 5 years of my life." I swallowed hard. "Please, can I have a little more time? Just a week to find somewhere." "Isabella," she interrupted, her patience clearly gone. "Stop making this harder than it needs to be. You're not my responsibility." Not her responsibility. The words echoed in my mind long after she left the room. That night, I packed in silence. It didn't take long. I owned so little. Most of the furniture had belonged to the house. Over the years, I had given away almost everything I once had. All that remained were a few clothes, some photographs, and memories I couldn't pack into a suitcase. I folded Daniel's sweater carefully and placed it on top. That was the only thing I couldn't leave behind. The hardest part was writing the note for the children. I sat at the small desk in my room for nearly an hour, staring at a blank piece of paper. How do you tell a child goodbye without breaking their heart? In the end, I kept it simple. Grandma has to go away for a while. I love you more than anything. Be kind to each other. I left it on the bathroom mirror, where they would see it in the morning. I couldn't face them. I couldn't answer their questions. I couldn't watch them cry. Before sunrise, I carried my suitcases out to my car. The air was cold, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes everything feel unreal. I paused in the driveway and looked back at the house. The house my son had been so proud of. The house where my grandchildren were still sleeping, unaware that when they woke up, I would be gone. For a moment, I almost went back inside. Almost. But then I saw Olivia standing at the window, watching me. Not with sadness. Not with regret. Just making sure I left. I got into the car. My hands trembled as I started the engine. And just like that, I drove away from the only life I had left with nowhere to go. I didn't know it yet, but the next 2 weeks would change everything. I didn't have a plan when I drove away that morning. I told myself I did, that I would figure something out, that I would find a small apartment, maybe a room somewhere, anything. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Grief had taken all my strength, and now I had nothing left to build a new life with. By the end of the first day, reality began to settle in. I parked my car behind a small roadside cafe on the edge of town. It wasn't a place anyone I knew would visit, and that mattered more than anything. I couldn't bear the thought of being seen like this, not by neighbors, not by acquaintances, not by anyone who had known me as Daniel's mother, as someone who had a home, a purpose, a place in the world. That night, I tried to sleep in the driver's seat. It was colder than I expected. My neck ached, my back cramped, and every small sound made my eyes snap open. A passing car, footsteps somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of neon lights. Everything felt like a threat. I kept thinking someone would knock on the window, tell me to move, ask questions I didn't know how to answer. But no one came. And somehow, that silence felt worse. The first few days passed in a strange blur. I created a routine, not because I wanted to, but because I needed something to hold on to. Every morning, I went into the cafe when it opened. I would order the cheapest thing on the menu, usually just coffee and toast, and sit in the same corner booth. I stretched that single cup of coffee for hours, pretending to read old newspapers or stare at my phone, just so no one would question why I stayed so long. The staff started recognizing me, but they didn't ask questions. Maybe they already knew. Maybe they saw people like me all the time. After that, I would drive around. Sometimes I looked at apartments, but the prices were impossible. Even the smallest places required deposits I couldn't afford. The cheaper options were in neighborhoods that didn't feel safe, especially for someone alone. Each time I inquired, I felt the same quiet humiliation, the polite smiles, the subtle judgment, the unspoken understanding that I didn't belong there. By the 5th day, I stopped looking. Instead, I focused on surviving. I kept a small bag of groceries in the back seat, bread, peanut butter, bottled water. Things that wouldn't spoil. I learned which public restrooms were clean enough to wash up in, which parking lots were quiet enough to sleep in without being disturbed. I became careful, invisible, and that was the hardest part. Not the hunger, not the discomfort, not even the fear. It was the feeling of disappearing. One afternoon, I went into a grocery store to buy more food. As I stood in the aisle, comparing prices, I saw someone I recognized, a woman who used to live down the street from us. We had spoken many times, shared small conversations, polite smiles. She looked directly at me, and then nothing.
No recognition. No greeting.
Her eyes simply moved past me as if I were part of the background, like a shelf or a display she didn't need. I stood there for a long moment, holding a jar in my hand, realizing something I hadn't wanted to admit. I had crossed a line, and once you cross it, people stop seeing you. By the second week, The exhaustion began to settle into my bones. Sleeping in the car left me stiff and sore. My clothes were wrinkled no matter how carefully I tried to keep them clean. My hair, once neatly styled, now hung lifeless around my face. I avoided mirrors. I avoided eye contact. I avoided thinking about what my life had become. But there was one thing I couldn't avoid: the children. Every few days, I found myself driving past their school. I told myself it was just coincidence, just passing by, but I always slowed down near the playground. Sometimes, if I was lucky, I would catch a glimpse of them during recess. Emma running with her friends. Lucas standing off to the side, kicking a ball absent-mindedly. I never got too close. I didn't want them to see me like this. I didn't want to answer questions I couldn't explain. But those moments, they were the only light I had. One afternoon, I made a mistake. I drove past the house. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I just wanted to feel close to Daniel again, to something familiar, something that still felt like home. But what I saw stopped me cold. There was a large dumpster in the driveway. Furniture was piled inside, chairs, boxes, pieces of the life we had shared. I recognized Daniel's desk immediately, the one where he used to sit in the evenings helping the kids with their homework. I watched as two men carried out more items. And then I saw Olivia. She stood there, giving instructions completely at ease. She looked happy, lighter even, like a burden had been removed from her life. They brought out another piece, a small wooden table Daniel had used during his final months. I remembered how he sat there for hours, sorting through photos, writing letters, holding on to the time he had left. And just like that, they threw it away. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my hands began to shake. I wanted to get out of the car. I wanted to scream, to stop them, to demand how she could erase him so quickly, so completely. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I drove away. That night, I broke. I parked in the same spot behind the cafe, but something inside me finally gave in. The tears came suddenly, violently. Not the quiet kind I had been holding back, but deep, uncontrollable sobs that left me shaking. I cried for Daniel. I cried for the children. I cried for the life I had lost. But most of all, I cried because I had started to believe something I never thought I would. That maybe I really didn't matter anymore. That maybe Olivia was right. That I was just someone who could be removed, replaced, forgotten. Eventually, the exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep with my head against the window, the cold glass pressing against my cheek. I dreamed of Daniel, not as the man he had become, but as a little boy, running toward me, laughing, calling my name, needing me. When I woke up, my face was damp with tears, and my phone was ringing. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it. Lately, unknown numbers only brought problems, bills, reminders, things I couldn't fix. But something made me answer. "Hello," I said, my voice hoarse. "Is this Isabella?" A calm, professional voice asked. "This is Michael Grant. I was your son's attorney." My heart skipped. "Yes, I'm his mother." "I've been trying to reach you," he continued. "There are urgent matters regarding your son's estate. I need you to come to my office today." I frowned slightly. "I think there's been a mistake. Olivia handles everything now." There was a pause. "No," he said carefully. "There are specific arrangements your son made that involve you directly. Arrangements Olivia is not aware of." I felt something shift inside me. A small, fragile spark. I don't think I'm in a condition to. I began, glancing at my reflection in the rearview mirror. "Come as you are," he interrupted gently. "This cannot wait." For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something other than pain. Not hope. Not yet. But something close. "Where do I go?" I asked quietly. As he gave me the address, I started the car. I didn't know what was waiting for me there, but I knew one thing. My life was about to change. I almost turned the car around twice on my way to the office. The closer I got to the city center, the more out of place I felt. Tall buildings, clean streets, people in tailored clothes walking with purpose. It all reminded me of a life I no longer belonged to. I caught my reflection again in the rearview mirror at a red light and barely recognized the woman staring back. My hair was unwashed, my eyes tired, my clothes creased from sleeping in them. I looked exactly like what I had become. Someone without a home. Someone without direction. Someone who didn't belong in a place like this. But his voice stayed in my head. This cannot wait. So I kept driving. The building he had mentioned was tall, glass-covered, the kind of place that made you feel small just standing in front of it. I hesitated before stepping inside, gripping the strap of my bag like it was the only thing grounding me. The lobby was quiet, polished, intimidating. People moved with confidence, their footsteps echoing against marble floors. I could feel eyes on me, even if no one actually looked. It was that same feeling again, of being seen and invisible at the same time. At the reception desk, I forced myself to speak. I have a meeting with Michael Grant. The receptionist gave me a quick glance, then nodded politely. Of course. He's expecting you. Elevator to the 12th floor.
No hesitation. No judgment.
That alone surprised me. When I stepped into his office, I immediately felt the difference. It was warm, not cold like the lobby. Bookshelves lined the walls, sunlight filtered through large windows, and there was a quiet sense of calm that made it easier to breathe. Michael Grant stood up as I entered. He was older than I expected, maybe in his 50s, with kind eyes and a composed presence that made you trust him without knowing why. Isabella, he said gently. Thank you for coming. I nodded, unsure what to say. Please sit. I lowered myself into the chair across from his desk, suddenly aware of everything. My appearance, the way my hands trembled slightly, the faint smell of coffee and cold air clinging to me. He didn't comment on any of it. Instead, he studied me for a moment, then asked quietly, Before we begin, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. I braced myself. What is your current living situation? The question hit harder than I expected. For a second, I considered lying, saying I was staying with a friend, that everything was fine, that I wasn't this. But something in his tone made that impossible. I'm in my car, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't react with shock or pity, just concern. I see, he said softly, making a note on a document in front of him. Daniel suspected something like this might happen. My head lifted slightly. He what? Michael opened a folder, thick with papers, carefully organized. Your son came to see me several months ago, he explained. After his diagnosis, he wanted to make changes to his will. Very specific changes. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Changes? I repeated. Yes, he said. And he was very clear about one thing, that these arrangements were to remain confidential until after his passing. A strange feeling began to grow in my chest. Confusion.
Curiosity.
Something else I didn't dare name yet. Michael adjusted his glasses and pulled out a document. I'm going to read you a section, he said, and I need you to listen carefully. I nodded, my hands tightening in my lap. He began. To my mother, Isabella, who has given everything of herself to support and love our family, I leave the sum of $8 million to be placed in a protected trust under the supervision of my legal representatives. I didn't hear the rest. 8 million. The number echoed in my head, unreal, impossible. I'm sorry, I interrupted, my voice shaking. That can't be right. Michael looked at me calmly. It is. No, Daniel didn't. He didn't have that kind of money. We never. Your son was more financially successful than he let on, he explained gently. Investments, business shares, insurance. He built quite a substantial estate. I leaned back in the chair, dizzy. But Olivia said everything went to her. The house, the money. She received a portion, he said, but not everything. I felt my heart begin to race. Why? I asked quietly. Michael paused for a moment before answering. Because he was worried, he said.
About you.
And about the children. The room suddenly felt smaller. What do you mean? I asked. He opened another document. There are additional clauses, he said. Conditions tied to your son's concerns about what might happen after his death. My stomach tightened. Isabella, he continued, his voice more serious now, if Daniel's wife were to remove you from the home or attempt to limit your relationship with the children, custody would legally transfer to you. I froze. Custody. I repeated. Yes. That's not possible. It is, he said firmly. All the necessary legal steps were taken in advance. Signed, documented, and approved. My mind struggled to catch up. You're saying the children would be placed in your care. Silence filled the room. I could hear my own heartbeat. But why? I whispered. Why would he do that? Michael hesitated, then reached for another paper. There's something else, he said. A letter. He asked me to give it to you personally. I shook my head slightly. I don't think I can read it. Then I'll read it to you, he said gently. He unfolded the page. Mom, he began, his voice steady. If you're hearing this, it means things didn't go the way I hoped. The sound of Daniel's words, even spoken by someone else, hit me like a wave. I tried to believe everything would be okay. Michael continued, reading. But I've seen things that worry me. I've heard conversations that made it clear that after I'm gone, you might not be treated the way you deserve. Tears blurred my vision. You are not a burden, he read. You never were. You are the heart of this family. And I need you to remember that. My hands covered my mouth as a sob escaped. I'm leaving you this not just to take care of yourself, he continued, but to take care of Emma and Lucas. They need you, more than you realize. Each word felt like Daniel was speaking directly to me. I trust you, the letter said. I always have. Please don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. You do. You always will. By the time Michael finished, I was crying openly. Not the quiet tears I had gotten used to, but something deeper, something stronger. For the first time in weeks, my tears didn't feel empty. They felt grounding. He knew, I whispered. He knew what would happen. Michael nodded. He prepared for it. I wiped my eyes slowly, trying to steady myself. What happens now? I asked. He gave me a small, reassuring smile. Now, he said, we make sure his wishes are honored. Something shifted inside me in that moment. For 2 weeks, I had felt powerless, invisible, broken. But sitting there, holding on to Daniel's words, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't helpless. Not anymore. We'll start by getting you somewhere safe, Michael continued. A hotel, temporary housing. Then we'll proceed with the legal process. I nodded, but my thoughts were already somewhere else.
Emma.
Lucas. My grandchildren. They think I left them, I said quietly. Michael's expression softened. Then we'll fix that too. For the first time since I had driven away from that house, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Not just hope, but purpose. And this time, I wasn't going to lose it. 3 days later, I stood in front of the house I had once called home, but this time, everything felt different. The same driveway, the same door, the same quiet suburban street, Yet I was no longer the woman who had left with trembling hands and nowhere to go. I held a folder in my grip, not tightly out of fear, but firmly, like something that finally belonged to me. Inside were documents that changed everything. Michael stood beside me, calm and composed as always. On my other side was a social worker, and a few steps behind us, a police officer watched the house with quiet attentiveness. It all felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life, someone stronger, someone who knew what she was doing. "Remember," Michael said quietly, "let me handle most of the conversation at first." I nodded, though my eyes were already fixed on the front door. My heart was pounding, but not with fear, not the same fear I had felt before. This was something else. Anticipation. Resolve. I pressed the doorbell. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps. The door opened. Olivia stood there, and the moment she saw me, her expression shifted rapidly. Confusion, irritation, then something closer to alarm as her eyes moved past me to the people behind. "Isabella," she said sharply. "What is this?" Michael stepped forward smoothly. "Good afternoon. My name is Michael Grant. I was Daniel's attorney. We need to discuss some legal matters concerning the children." Her posture stiffened immediately. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Isabella, what are you doing here with?" She gestured vaguely behind me. "This." The officer spoke calmly. "Ma'am, we're here to carry out a legal process. We'd prefer to discuss this inside." For a second, Olivia didn't move. Then, reluctantly, she stepped aside. We entered the house. The moment I crossed the threshold, a strange sensation washed over me, familiarity mixed with something colder. The living room looked nothing like it used to. Everything was white, polished, minimal. No photos.
No items.
No sign that children even lived there. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a showroom. "Where are the children?" the social worker asked. "At school," Olivia answered automatically, but her voice had lost its confidence. "What is this about?" Michael opened his briefcase. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his tone firm but professional, "I need to inform you that certain conditions outlined in Daniel's will have now been activated." She let out a short laugh, but it sounded forced. "That's not possible. I handled his estate." "Not entirely," Michael replied. He began reading. As the words filled the room, I watched Olivia's face carefully. At first, she tried to maintain control, but slowly, the certainty in her expression began to crack. Her eyes flickered, her jaw tightened, and by the time he reached the part about custody, the color had drained from her face. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake," Michael said calmly. "All legal documentation is valid and enforceable. You expect me to believe that he just what? Gave you everything?" she said, turning to me now, her voice sharp with disbelief. "I didn't ask for anything," I replied quietly. "He made his choices." Her eyes narrowed.
No.
"This doesn't make sense. Daniel would never." Michael interrupted gently but firmly. "Your husband anticipated certain outcomes. He took steps to ensure the children's well-being under specific circumstances." "What circumstances?" she demanded. Without a word, Michael took out a small device and pressed a button. Daniel's voice filled the room. Even after everything, hearing him again made my chest tighten painfully. "Olivia," his recorded voice said, "what happens to my mom after I'm gone?" There was a pause, then her voice, cold, distant. "She's an adult, Daniel. She'll figure it out." The room went still. I didn't look at Olivia. I didn't need to. I could feel the tension radiating from her. "You recorded me?" she whispered, her voice trembling now. "Daniel did," Michael said. "With legal guidance." The recording continued briefly, enough to make everything undeniable. When it ended, Silence settled heavily over the room. "This is insane," Olivia said, but the confidence was gone. "You can't just come in here and take my children." "They are not just your children," I said, my voice steady for the first time since I had arrived. "They are his children, too." She turned to me, anger flashing in her eyes. "And you think you can do better? You? You had nothing. You were living in your car." Michael stepped in before I could respond. "That is no longer the case. Isabella now has full financial support as outlined in the will." Olivia froze. "How much?" she asked quietly. Michael didn't hesitate. 8 million. The number hit her like a shock. I watched her carefully, the calculation, the realization, the sudden shift as everything she thought she controlled slipped away. "That's not fair," she said, but it sounded weaker now. "I'm their mother." "Being a mother isn't just a title," I said, before I could stop myself. The word surprised even me. "When was the last time you sat with Emma when she couldn't sleep?" I continued. "Or helped Lucas when he missed his father so much he couldn't focus on anything else?" She opened her mouth, but no answer came. "When did you last let them talk about him?" I pressed. Instead of telling them to move on, "I was trying to help them," she said, but it sounded more like a question than a defense. "No," I said quietly. "You were trying to erase him." The social worker stepped forward gently. "We'll need to arrange to pick the children up from school today." Olivia looked around the room, as if searching for something to hold on to. "Their things are upstairs," she said faintly. But I already knew. So much had been thrown away. So much had been lost. And yet the most important things were still here. The children. As we prepared to leave, Olivia grabbed my arm. "Isabella, wait," she said, her voice desperate now. "You don't understand what you're doing." I looked down at her hand, then back at her. For a moment, I remembered every time I had tried to reach out to her, to help, to connect, and how she had pushed me away. Now the roles were reversed. "I understand perfectly," I said gently, removing her hand. "I'm doing what he asked me to do." "This isn't over," she said, but there was no strength behind it anymore. I didn't respond. As we walked away from the house, I felt something lift inside me. Not anger, not revenge. Something quieter, something stronger. Closure. But the most important moment was still ahead. When we arrived at the school, my heart began to race again. Not from fear, but from something far more powerful. I was about to see them again. And this time, I wasn't leaving. I didn't realize how nervous I was until I saw the school gates. All the confidence I had felt just an hour ago began to fade, replaced by something softer, more fragile. My hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel as I parked across the street, watching children run across the playground, their laughter carrying through the air like something from a life I had almost lost. "They'll be out in a few minutes," the social worker said gently from the passenger seat. I nodded, but my eyes never left the building. What if they were angry? What if they believed what Olivia told them? What if they didn't want me anymore? The thought hit harder than anything else I had faced so far. Before I could sink too deep into it, the bell rang. Children began pouring out in waves, backpacks bouncing, voices loud, full of energy. I scanned the crowd anxiously, my heart beating faster with each passing second. And then I saw her.
Emma.
She was walking slowly, holding her backpack straps tightly, her head slightly lowered like she was lost in her own thoughts. My chest tightened at the sight of her. She looked smaller somehow, quieter than I remembered. I stepped out of the car before I even realized I had moved. "Emma," I called softly. She froze. For a second, she didn't turn around. Then slowly she did. Her eyes found me, and for a moment, she just stared, as if trying to understand if I was real. "Grandma?" she whispered. I dropped to my knees right there on the pavement, not caring about anyone watching. I'm here, sweetheart, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I'm right here. She took a step toward me, then another, and suddenly she was running. When she threw her arms around me, I held her as tightly as I could, like I was afraid she might disappear again. Are you real? She asked into my shoulder. Or am I dreaming again? The words broke something inside me. I'm real, I said, pulling back just enough to look at her. And I'm not going anywhere. Tears filled her eyes immediately. But Mom said you left because you didn't want to stay with us anymore. I shook my head gently. That's not true. I never wanted to leave you. Not for a second. Before she could say anything else, I saw Lucas approaching. He walked slower, more cautious, his eyes moving between me and Emma. For a brief moment, I saw hope flicker across his face, but then it faded, replaced by something guarded. Hi, he said, stopping a few steps away.
Suar, I raplia sufli.
He hesitated. Mom said you were mad at us. The words hit like a quiet knife. I was never mad at you, I said firmly. Not ever. He studied my face carefully, like he was trying to decide if he believed me. Then slowly he stepped closer. Then why did you leave? He asked. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully but honestly. I left because your mom asked me to, I said. And, at the time, I thought I didn't have a choice. Emma frowned. But you're our grandma. You're supposed to stay. You're right, I said gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And I should have stayed.
I'm sorry.
Lucas crossed his arms slightly. So, what now? I smiled softly. Now, I'm taking you home. They both looked at me at the same time. Home, Emma repeated. With me, I said. You're going to live with me now. Lucas blinked. We're not going back to Mom's house? You'll still see her, I explained calmly. But you'll live with me. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emma asked the question I didn't expect. Can we have pictures of Dad again? My heart ached. Of course, I said immediately. As many as you want. Lucas looked down for a second, then back at me. Mom said it was better not to talk about him all the time, he said quietly. I reached out and gently placed my hand over his. It's okay to talk about him, I said. It's okay to miss him. It's okay to feel whatever you feel. He didn't answer, but I saw something in his eyes shift, something small, but important. Relief. The drive to the apartment was quiet at first. Emma leaned against the window, watching the city pass by, while Lucas sat upright, observing everything like he was trying to understand what was happening. I didn't rush them. They had already been through too much change. When we arrived, I felt a flicker of nervousness again. The apartment wasn't large, and it certainly wasn't as polished as the house they had come from. But it was warm, simple,
real.
This is it, I said, unlocking the door. They stepped inside slowly. Emma looked around first, her eyes moving from the couch to the small table, then toward the hallway. It feels cozy, she said. Lucas nodded slightly.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel cold. I smiled faintly. I thought you might like that. I showed them their rooms, not big, but prepared with care. A few of their favorite things I had managed to gather, some new items Michael had helped arrange, and small touches to make it feel like theirs. Emma immediately walked to the bed and sat down, hugging a stuffed toy I had found. You remembered, she said quietly. Of course I did, I replied. Lucas stepped into his room and looked around, then ran his hand along the desk. It's smaller than before, he said. I nodded. It is. He shrugged lightly. I like it better. That simple sentence meant more than he probably realized. That evening, we ordered food and sat together in the living room. No perfect table setting. No rules about crumbs or mess. Just us. Emma laughed for the first time when I told her a story about her father as a child, and Lucas actually asked questions, curious, engaged, present. Little by little, the silence that had surrounded us began to break. But the most important moment came later that night. After I had tucked them into bed, Emma called out softly, "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart." She hesitated. "You're really not going to leave again, right?" I walked back into her room and sat beside her. "No," I said gently. "I'm not leaving." Lucas spoke from the other room. "Promise." I looked between them, my heart full and heavy at the same time. "I promise," I said. And for the first time in weeks, I meant it with everything I had. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, listening to the quiet breathing of the children down the hall, I realized something important. I hadn't just been given a second chance. I had been given a purpose. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone take it away. The first few weeks were quieter than I expected, not because there was no life in the apartment, but because everything felt careful. Emma and Lucas moved through each day like they were testing the ground beneath their feet, unsure if it would hold. They asked permission for everything, to leave a toy on the floor, to take a second slice of toast, even to laugh too loudly. It broke my heart in small, constant ways, the kind that don't shatter you all at once, but wear you down slowly if you let them. I decided early on that I wouldn't rush them. Healing isn't something you force. It's something you make space for. So instead of rules, I gave them consistency. Breakfast together every morning, even if it was simple. Walks after school, when the weather allowed it. Evenings where we sat in the same room, doing different things but staying close. I didn't tell them how to feel, and I didn't correct their emotions. If Emma cried, I let her cry. If Lucas went quiet, I sat nearby, without pushing him to talk. Little by little, the tension in the apartment began to soften. The first real change came on a Wednesday afternoon. Emma was sitting on the floor in the living room with her toys spread out around her, not neatly arranged, not lined up the way she used to keep them, but scattered, chaotic, alive. She was talking to them quietly, making up a story in a soft voice, completely absorbed. I stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment, feeling something warm rise in my chest. She stopped suddenly when she noticed me. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, starting to gather everything. "I'll clean it up." I stepped forward gently. "Why?" She blinked, confused. "Because it's messy." "And?" I asked softly. She hesitated, clearly unsure of the right answer. "It's okay to have a mess sometimes," I said. "It means you're having fun." She looked at me like I had just said something unbelievable. "Really? Really?" Slowly, she sat back down, still watching me as if expecting me to change my mind. When I didn't, she picked up one of the toys again and continued her story, a little louder this time. That was the first crack in the wall. Lucas took longer. He didn't show his emotions as openly, but I could see them in the way he carried himself. Always alert, always careful, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. He kept his things organized, his voice controlled, his expressions neutral. It wasn't natural for a boy his age, and I knew it. The breakthrough came late one evening. He was sitting at the table with his homework spread out, staring at a math problem for far too long. I sat across from him quietly, not interrupting, just being there. After a while, he sighed. "I don't get it," he muttered. "Want help?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded slightly. We worked through the problem together, step by step. At first, he barely spoke, but as we went on, he started asking questions. Real questions. Not just about the homework, but about how things worked, why certain answers made sense. And then, out of nowhere, he said, "Dad used to explain it like this too." The room went still. I looked up at him, careful not to react too strongly. He was very patient, I said softly. Lucas nodded, still looking at the paper. Yeah, he didn't get mad when I didn't understand. I felt the weight of what he wasn't saying. You know, I said gently, it's okay to miss him. He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, I do. All the time. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. I do too. That night, for the first time, he didn't pull away. After that, things began to shift more noticeably. Emma started leaving her things around, without apologizing. Lucas began asking for help more often, not just with homework, but with small things, opening jars, finding misplaced items, even choosing what to wear. They started talking about their father more, not in whispers, not like it was something forbidden, but naturally like part of their lives. One Saturday, it rained all afternoon. We stayed inside, the windows fogged slightly from the warmth of the apartment. I was in the kitchen making sandwiches when I heard Emma's voice from the living room. Grandma, can you come here? I wiped my hands and walked in. She was holding one of the photos I had printed earlier that week. Daniel smiling, arms around both children, sunlight catching in his hair. Can we put more pictures up? She asked. Of course, I said. Lucas looked up from the couch. Not just in the living room. In our rooms too. Anywhere you want, I told them. We spent the next hour choosing places for the photos. Some on the walls, some on shelves, some near their beds. It wasn't perfect. Some frames were slightly crooked, some pictures placed unevenly, but it didn't matter. It felt right. At one point, Emma stood back and smiled. It feels like he's still here, she said. I felt my throat tighten, but I smiled back. In a way, I said softly, he is. That evening, something unexpected happened. I was in the kitchen again when I felt a small presence beside me. Emma stood there, quiet, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. Grandma, she said. Yes, sweetheart. She looked up at me, her eyes serious. Mom said crying makes people weak. I felt a slow ache settle in my chest. And what do you think? I asked gently. She shrugged. I don't know. I try not to cry. I knelt down in front of her. Crying doesn't make you weak, I said softly. It means you care. It means you love someone enough to miss them. Her lip trembled slightly. Sometimes I want to cry, she admitted. Then you should, I said. You don't have to hold it in here. She stared at me for a second longer. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. And just like that, she cried. Not quietly, not carefully, fully. I held her close, letting her feel everything she had been holding back. A few moments later, I felt Lucas join us, his arms wrapping around both of us without a word. We stayed like that for a long time, 3 people holding each other together. That night, after they had both fallen asleep, I sat alone in the living room, listening to the soft rhythm of their breathing down the hall. The apartment felt different now, fuller, warmer, alive in a way it hadn't been before. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt something settle inside me. Not just relief, not just stability, but something deeper. We were healing, not perfectly, not all at once, but truly. And as I sat there in the quiet, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were beginning to live again. 6 months later, life no longer felt fragile. It wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was real, steady, and ours. We had moved into a small house with a backyard just big enough for Emma to practice her cartwheels and for Lucas to throw a baseball against the fence for hours without getting bored. The walls were filled with photos, not arranged neatly, but layered over time. Birthdays, school days, quiet afternoons, and of course, Daniel, smiling from nearly every corner. The house was never silent, and that was exactly how it was supposed to be. Emma had music playing in her room most afternoons, sometimes too loud, sometimes off-key when she sang along, but I never asked her to turn it down unless it was truly overwhelming. Lucas had claimed the living room floor as his territory, spreading his homework, books, and sometimes even snacks across the table and carpet like it was all part of the same project. It was messy. It was loud. It was alive. And every time I looked around, I felt something close to gratitude, not just for what we had, but for what we had managed to rebuild. That morning had started like any other. Pancakes on the stove, the smell of vanilla and cinnamon filling the kitchen, Daniel's recipe. Emma sat at the counter swinging her legs, talking about a school project she was excited about, while Lucas pretended not to listen but corrected her twice when she got a detail wrong. It was ordinary, beautifully ordinary.
The doorbell rang.
At first, I ignored it, assuming it was a delivery or a neighbor. But something made me pause. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way the sound seemed sharper than usual. "I'll get it," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. As I walked to the door, a familiar tension crept into my chest, faint, but still there. Old habits don't disappear overnight. I opened it. Olivia stood on the porch. For a second, neither of us spoke. She looked different. Not drastically, not in a way that could be pointed out immediately, but something had shifted. Her posture wasn't as rigid, her expression less controlled. Even the way she held herself, there was uncertainty there, something I had never seen before. "Hello, Isabella," she said quietly. "Hello," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. She hesitated, then held up a small gift bag. "I was hoping I could see the children for a few minutes." "It's not your scheduled day," I said calmly. "I know," she admitted. I brought something for Emma. Her birthday is next week." I studied her face carefully. 6 months ago, I would have expected manipulation, something rehearsed, something calculated.
But now,
I wasn't so sure. There was something more genuine in her eyes, something uncertain, almost hesitant. Behind me, I could hear Emma laughing. That sound grounded me. "You can come in for a few minutes," I said finally. She nodded, almost relieved, and stepped inside. The moment she entered, I saw her take in the space, the scattered books, the slightly uneven furniture, the photos on the walls. Her eyes lingered on one in particular, Daniel with the children, both of them laughing, his arms around them. She looked away quickly. Lucas was the first to notice her. "Hi, Mom," he said, his tone polite but distant. "Hi," she replied softly. "How are you?" "Good." That was all. No excitement, no tension, just distance. Emma came down the stairs a moment later, stopping halfway when she saw her. "Mom," Olivia smiled, but it wasn't the bright, controlled smile I remembered. It was smaller, careful. "I brought you something," she said, holding out the bag. Emma glanced at me instinctively. I gave a small nod. She walked down the rest of the stairs and took it, opening it slowly. Inside was a simple necklace, a small silver locket. "It has a picture of Dad," Olivia said quietly. Emma opened it and gasped softly when she saw the photo inside. "It's him," she whispered. Olivia nodded.
"For you," she said.
"So you can have him with you." Emma smiled, not a big smile, but a real one.
"Thank you," she said.
Olivia stepped closer. "Do you want help putting it on?" Emma nodded. For a brief moment, they stood together, Olivia carefully fastening the necklace, her hands steady but gentle. It was the most natural I had ever seen her with Emma. Lucas watched from the side, not saying anything, but not turning away either. After a few minutes, Emma went back upstairs, and Lucas returned to his work. The house fell quiet again. Olivia and I stood in the kitchen, the air between us filled with everything we hadn't said. They seem happy, she said finally. They are, I replied. She nodded slowly. I can see that. There was a pause. I wanted to apologize, she said, her voice quieter now. For what I did. For what I said. I didn't respond immediately. Apologies are easy to say. Understanding them is harder. What changed? I asked. She looked down at her hands. Losing them, she said simply. I thought I had everything under control. I thought I was doing what was best. But I wasn't listening. Not to them. Not to Daniel. Not to anyone. Her voice faltered slightly. I didn't realize how much I was pushing them away until they were gone. I leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. And now? I asked. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, she said quickly. I know they won't. I just want a chance to do better. The honesty in her voice surprised me. Not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't. They still need you, I said after a moment. But not the way you were before. She nodded. I don't know how to be different, she admitted. You start by listening, I said. Not fixing. Not controlling. Just being there. She let out a small breath. I'll try. When she left, the house felt quiet again, but not tense. Different. Lucas looked up from his homework. Do you think she's changing? He asked. I considered the question carefully. I think she's trying, I said. He nodded slowly. Emma came downstairs a few minutes later, touching the locket around her neck. I like it, she said.
I'm glad, I replied.
That evening, after they had gone to bed, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, the cool air settling around me. 6 months ago, I had been sitting in a car, alone, convinced my life was over. Now, I had a home. I had purpose. I had them. And even the past, the part that had hurt the most, didn't feel as heavy anymore. It hadn't disappeared, but it had changed, just like we had. And for the first time, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. We weren't just rebuilding. We were becoming something stronger. A year had passed, though sometimes it still felt like everything had happened yesterday. Grief doesn't follow a straight line. Some mornings I would wake up feeling steady, grounded, almost at peace, and then something small would pull me back. A smell, a song, the way the sunlight hit the kitchen table exactly the way it used to when Daniel sat there with his coffee. But the difference now was that those moments no longer broke me. They stayed, softened, folded into everything else we had built. Our home had changed in ways that were impossible to measure. Not physically, the same walls, the same furniture, the same backyard where Emma still practiced her cartwheels and Lucas still threw his baseball, but the feeling inside it that had deepened. It wasn't just warm anymore. It was rooted, stable, safe. The kind of place where people didn't just live, they belonged. The children had grown in ways that still surprised me. Emma was louder now, not just in voice, but in presence. She filled spaces without apologizing for it. Her laughter came easily, and when she was upset, she didn't hide it anymore. She would come find me, sit beside me, and say exactly what she felt, sometimes in tears, sometimes in frustration, but always honestly. Lucas had changed more quietly, but just as deeply. The guarded edges he used to carry had softened. He still liked his routines, still kept his thoughts organized, but he wasn't afraid to let things fall apart sometimes. He left his books open, his questions unfinished, his emotions unfiltered in small, honest ways. They were becoming themselves again. And that was everything. Sunday mornings had become our ritual. Pancakes, always the same recipe, too much vanilla, a hint of cinnamon. We never measured it properly, and somehow that made it feel right. Emma would sit at the counter, trying to flip them and failing more often than not, while Lucas would pretend he didn't care but always stepped in to fix the ones that went wrong. "Dad used to do it like this," he said one morning, adjusting the pan. "I know," I smiled. "You're getting just as good as he was." He didn't respond, but I saw the small flicker of pride in his expression. Emma grinned. "I'm better than both of you." "You burned 3 in a row," Lucas pointed out. "They were crispy," she corrected confidently. The argument that followed was loud, playful, full of energy. I stood there, watching them, and for a moment I closed my eyes. This was what Daniel had wanted. Not perfection. Not silence.
This.
Later that afternoon, Emma found me in the hallway. "Grandma," she said, serious in a way that always made me pause, "do you think Dad can see us?" I looked at her carefully. "What do you think?" I asked. She shrugged slightly. "I think maybe, like when we're happy." I smiled softly. "I think he'd be very proud of you," I said. She nodded, satisfied with that answer. Lucas, who had been listening from the doorway, added quietly, "I think he knew we'd be okay." That stayed with me long after the conversation ended, because I believed it too. He had known. That evening, something unexpected happened. There was a knock at the door. Not the doorbell, just a soft, hesitant knock. I opened it. Olivia stood there. She didn't look the way she used to anymore. The sharp edges had softened. The confidence that once bordered on control had been replaced with something quieter, more grounded.
"Hi," she said. Raplia.
"I know it's not my day," she said quickly. "I just wanted to ask something." I stepped aside, letting her in. The children greeted her, not with excitement, but with something more balanced. Familiarity, caution, but also acceptance. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. After a few minutes, she turned to me. "I was wondering if, maybe next weekend, we could spend a little more time together," she said. "Not just a visit. Maybe take them to the park. All of us." I studied her face. There was no pressure in her voice.
"No expectation."
Just a request. "That could work," I said slowly. "We'll talk about it with them."
She nodded, relieved.
As she prepared to leave, she paused. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not shutting me out completely." I didn't answer right away, because the truth was I had wanted to once, but life had changed us all. "They deserve both of us," I said finally, "just in the right way." She nodded, and for the first time, there was no tension between us as she walked out the door. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat in my room and opened the drawer where I kept Daniel's letter. The paper was slightly worn now, the edges soft from being unfolded so many times. I read it again, not because I needed reassurance anymore, but because it reminded me of where we had started. "You are not a burden." The words didn't sting anymore. They settled. They belonged. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the drawer, then walked to the window. The house was quiet, peaceful, complete. For so long, I had believed that losing everything meant the end, that being pushed out, left behind, forgotten was something you couldn't recover from. But I was wrong, because sometimes losing everything forces you to see what truly matters. Not the house, not the comfort, not the illusion of stability, but the people, the love that remains, the connections that refuse to break. Emma stirred in her room, murmuring softly in her sleep. Lucas shifted down the hall. Small sounds, living sounds. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it all settle around me. This was home, not because of where we were, but because of who we had become together. And for the first time in a very long time, I knew something with complete certainty. We weren't just okay. We were exactly where we were meant to be.